Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of MRTC Talks. My name is Paul, one of the counselors here. Today's topic, how to find a safe place to live after MRTC. During the time that you're here in treatment, you will be called upon to make a number of important decisions. But I don't think there is a decision more important than the one that we're going to be talking about today. And that is the issue of where you will choose to live after completing MRTC. The choice of a place to live may have profound consequences and implications for your chances of recovery. A choice of a place to live can in many ways support or enhance a guy's chances at recovery. It can also potentially very much detract from it and make it much harder to accomplish. The issue of thinking closely about the issue of where to live is one of the most important things I think you could choose to spend some time on while you are here. Today I want to talk with you for a few minutes about a few questions that I think are central to this issue of where to live so that you can make the best decision for yourself and thus set yourself up for the best chances of achieving your goals with regards to substances. I think that the decision in terms of where to live boils down to two related but distinct questions. The first question is, which town or community or neighborhood do you wish to live in? And second, what type of living arrangement or housing arrangement might you wish to live in? Again, as we mentioned, those are related but in some ways distinct, and so I'd like to cover each of those in turn. The first threshold question is, what town or community or neighborhood do you wish to locate yourself in after completing MRTC? Now you might be sitting here thinking like, hey man, I'm from Abbotsford, I'm going back to Abbotsford. What are you talking about? What town am I going back to? But the reality is that Abbotsford in that case may or may not be the safest place for you to go. It may or may not be a place that gives you the best chances of being able to recover. And before you just automatically conclude that you will return to whatever town or community you came from, I encourage you to consider the extent to which that town is serving you or not in your larger recovery goals. As I mentioned, the choice of a town or community or neighborhood can be supportive or it can detract from a person's chances of recovery. How does it do that? Let's talk a little bit about first how the choice of a town might support a guy in his recovery. The way that it might support a guy in his recovery is if the town or community or neighborhood is located in proximity to things that support him in his recovery goals. In other words, that he locates himself close to the very things that will sustain him and support him and encourage him to move forward in terms of his goals. What could those things be? Anything that has the potential to support you. It could be things like your friends, like meetings, like a counselor, like a sponsor, like a job, like a church, like a gym, like nature, like family. What are the things that support you in your recovery, and are you locating yourselves in places that are in proximity to those supports? I'll give you an example from my own personal life, and that is that at a time in my life, my wife and I decided that we wanted to have an acreage, but we couldn't afford living on the other side of the river, so we decided to move close to in between Mission and Maple Ridge to find an acreage. And every time she would show me a picture of a potential farm that we might contemplate buying, before I became interested in looking at the house, in looking at the property, I was interested in looking at the distance between the address of the farm and three things that supported me in my life. What were those three things? Number one, the gym. That may strike you as somewhat ironic, but the gym is a place that I go to, not just to look good physically, hopefully, but far more importantly, to feel better emotionally. The difference in the way that I feel emotionally on days where I work out compared to days where I don't, night and day. So because the gym is a central support for me in my life, psychologically and emotionally, I wanted to ensure that whatever place we bought was in proximity to that. And if a place was too far, it was out of the question. The second was my work at MRTC. This is a job, for any of you who know me, that provides me with a great deal of meaning and purpose and satisfaction. And I wanted, but as a result of that, it supports me in my life, and I wanted to make sure that we were located in proximity to that. Too far away, deal breaker for me at least. And the third was my friends. and I wanted to ensure that I could still get together with them, hang out with them, do things with them. These were the supports that were important to me, and I wanted to make sure that I was located in proximity to that. So the question for you then is, what are the things that support you in your recovery? What are the most important supports? And how does a choice of community or neighborhood or town help you to be close to or in proximity to those very things? So that's the way that a choice of a town can increase a person's chance of recovery. What are the ways in which it can detract from a person's chances of recovery? It's really the flip side of what we just talked about. And that is, if the choice of a town or neighborhood or community puts a person in proximity with things that bring him down, things that are risks, things that are dangers, things that are negative influences, things that detract from his chances of recovery and becoming the kind of man he aspires to be. What kind of things? Old using friends, dealers, haunts, old neighborhoods, unsavory kinds of people, bad experiences, and perhaps one of the most powerful and sometimes underappreciated negative influences of all, memories. Memories of using and drinking, which may serve as triggers and make it harder to stay sober in the future. So a choice of a town or a community can enhance a person's choice of recovery if it puts them in proximity to things that support them, or it can detract from their chances of recovery if it puts them in proximity to things that have the potential to bring them down. One of the realities is that many of us make those choices without really contemplating the extent to which they are either keeping us away from supports or bringing us close to things that are potential dangers to us. As a couple of examples of that, I was working with a guy a couple of years ago who had been to 20 treatments, if you can imagine, 20. And during the time that he came to MRTC, he began to see a counselor at Alouette Addictions for outpatient counseling. And he came back and he told the group that in 20 years of trying to stay sober, he had never met a counselor who had had more of an impact on him, helped him more, supported him more, been, as he put it, a game changer than this counselor at Alouette Addictions. His aftercare plan? Moved to White Rock. What? You can imagine that when his group heard that, a couple of guys interjected and said, wait a second, man, you've been to 20 treatments and you are telling us, right, that the thing that has made the most impact positively on your chances of recovery is this girl that you've been seeing at Alouette Addictions, and your aftercare plan is to move away to another town, taking you out of her catchment area such that she can no longer work with you? What are you thinking? I never thought about it, man. Think about it, man. He did decide to think about that and decided to change his plan for a number of months and stay in Maple Ridge. As the converse of that, people sometimes put themselves in positions that are close to danger without fully realizing it. I was working with another client, in this case a 70-year-old guy who came from Abbotsford. He lived in his house. And when he was presenting his relapse prevention plan in group, it became clear to the group that what he was proposing to do was to return back to his old house. This guy was a guy who'd struggled with alcohol issues. And as the import of this became clearer, based on things that he had told us already in group, one of the guys in group stopped him and said, wait a second, man, let me ask you something. So what you're telling us is that you are planning after MRTC to return to the same house, the same family room, the same easy chair that you have told us that you have spent the previous 5 to 7 years in every night, drinking 24 to 36 beers a night. Is that right? And the guy looked kind of surprised initially, and he said, like, yeah, but I've gotten all the alcohol out of there. All the paraphernalia is out. I got rid of all my glasses. There's no booze in my house. But then one of the guys said, yeah, but you know what still is in your house? Memories. 5 to 7 years, 365 days a year, 24 to 36 beers a night. Memories, sitting in that family room, in that easy chair, drinking. To which the man was going to gratitude at 1 o'clock on Friday and be sitting in that self-same chair 7 o'clock the same night. The import of that had never previously dawned on that man, that he was locating himself in a place full of dangerous and risky memories began to kind of sink in. And he said to the group, "What do you want me to do? I understand now what you're talking about, but I'm gratituding in a day or two. Plus, it's my house. Where else can I go?" What do you think the group suggested to him at that point? Interestingly, right, what they suggested to him was a very insightful approach, which was someone said, "Okay, if you have no choice to go home, but to go home, you got to go home, but you got to change that room. You have to paint it a different color. You have to throw out that easy chair. You have to move the furniture all around. You have to put new things on the wall. You have to make it to the greatest extent possible a different room." And in a not uncommon act of generosity that we see around here at MRTC, even after that guy gratituded, the following weekend, many members of his group went to him to his house to help him to do exactly just that, to try to eliminate to the greatest extent possible the triggering effects of memories. So the first question that I encourage you to think about is, what town should you optimally be located in after you leave MRTC? And that is an involved question. It may also have involvement with your future plans. If you are deciding, for example, to go to school, to pursue a new career, to get out of a job that you hate, to move away from a relationship that might have been bringing you down, to have a fresh start, all of these things may have implications for the community that you locate yourself in. I encourage you to give that some thought as you go through your treatment here. The second question, which is related but distinct, is what type of living arrangement will most meet your needs? And when you stop and think about it, there's really only 4 general types of housing arrangements that any guy could have. Number one is that he could live by himself in his own pad, his own basement suite, his own apartment, his own home. Number 2, he could live with family members of some kind, however you define that. He could live with his wife, with his husband, with his brother, sister, aunt, uncle, kids, niece, nephew, with some member of his family. The third is that he could live with a roommate, either in or out of recovery. He could live with a guy that is in early recovery that he's met at a meeting, graduated from MRTC with, or otherwise know, or he could live with roommates that are not in recovery. And the fourth option is that he could live in something called second stage or transitional housing. Now, you intuitively may know what the first 3 options are: living by yourself, living with a family member, living with a roommate, but you may or may not have a clear sense of what second stage transitional housing programs are about. These are programs where guys in early recovery live in a group setting, just like you do at MRTC, and they, at their house, they receive, by virtue of living with other guys in early recovery, some of the benefits that come from that, like support, encouragement, accountability, inspiration. And different second stage programs have varying levels of support which they may offer. Some more intensive programs may have their own on-site staff, like a house manager or a house counselor. Some may have on-site meetings of AA, NA, other types of support groups. Other ones may be less structured and may be mostly aspiring to be a safe place to live, with some general expectations of the number of outside meetings that a person may go to. But the general idea of a second stage housing program is that it serves as a transition, as the name implies, from a more intensive program like MRTC, which, by the way, is technically classified as a first stage program. So it serves as a transition in which you come out of first stage, and instead of going all the way to independent living in one fell swoop, for some people it can be wise to take it incrementally, gradually lower the amount of structure, the amount of support, the amount of service that you receive, not down to nothing like when you're living by yourself, but down to something less than MRTC, but more than living independently. Get used to that. Get stable in that for a number of months, and then you move to live independently, which I'm sure for all of you is ultimately your goal. So really, those 4 options are the only options that are available. Now, one of the key things to recognize about those options is that all of them obviously have pros and cons, and you have to weigh the pros and cons to determine which is potentially more advantageous for you. As an easy example, If you think about what are some of the pros, some of the advantages of living by yourself, well, you have privacy, you have complete freedom and autonomy to want to do whatever you want with, and because you're not living with anyone, there is obviously no risk of any type of conflict or disagreement that you might get into in a more conjugate living situation. Conversely, there's also some detriments or some negatives. There's an absence of support, an absence of accountability, an absence of friendship. You might end up getting lonely, bored. So you can see that there's pros and cons to be weighed in that option as well. If you go to another option like second stage housing, for example, there are some advantages. You're living with guys in early recovery, so again, much like an MRTC, you may get some measure of support, some measure of companionship, some measure of accountability, but obviously less privacy, maybe more potential for disagreements or conflicts, less autonomy to do what you want to do. The key is that you have to weigh out the pros and cons for yourself to decide what is the best option for you. I think that those are the main issues that a person needs to address to make this decision kind of intelligently. I will say that if you have tried to stay sober in the past, if you've been to treatment in the past, and you have, for example, gone to live independently after leaving treatment and found that you've not been able to maintain that over the long haul, I do encourage you to consider the possibility of going to a second stage program. I think there are some strong benefits to consider. The amount of structure, the amount of support, the amount of accountability that gets built into those programs, that can be very helpful, particularly in the first few months after leaving MRTC, when some of the pressures that are going to be operating on you are going to be their greatest. In addition, one of the other benefits of second stage is that it mimics or reflects the way that we typically learn new skills, like in this case, living independently, to do it gradually, incrementally, step by step. Just like, for example, before we run, we walk, before we walk, we crawl. Before we live independently completely as a sober person, sometimes it can be helpful for at least some of us to have an experience living in an intermediate type of stage, below that offered by MRTC, but above offered by living independently. But these are some of the issues that I think that will be good for you to think about. Some of the things that I really encourage you to consider really in conclusion are the following. Number one, this is a serious issue. As I mentioned, I think it is one of the most important decisions that you will make here because so much stands or falls on that basis. The supports that you might marshal in support of your recovery and the risks that might pose a danger to your recovery all hinge to some degree on where you choose to live. So I invite you to think about that and to think about that seriously. Talk it over with your groups, talk it over with your counselors. Don't just assume that wherever you came from is automatically the safest and best place for you to go. The second thing I would encourage you to do is to use the staff here to help you to make that decision. Angel, our social worker, is an invaluable resource, both in helping you to think through the pros and cons of different options and also being a fountainhead of information and knowledge of different types of programs, and she can help you to access ones that are going to meet your needs. And the third recommendation is to start early. I know when you get here, 7 weeks may seem like a long time, but as ask anyone who's been here for a few weeks, they're going to tell you it's going to go by in the blink of an eye. And it takes, obviously, time to hook up a thoughtful and considered housing arrangement. If you want to find an apartment, that takes some time. You want to get in the second stage, many of these places have waiting lists. So I encourage you to start early. You should be ideally preparing for your discharge from MRTC and thinking about where you want to live on the very first few days that you get here. But I think that if you make this decision well and go to a place that is safe, that is supportive, that gives you the best chance of recovery, it can be one of the most significant parts of your aftercare plan, and it can greatly increase the chances that you achieve your goals with respect to substances. If you're watching this in group, I encourage you to talk to your group about your feelings of where to go after MRTC, what the pros and cons are of different options, what you've tried in the past, what you're thinking about doing, and ask people to give you some feedback on that. They may be able to spot issues that you haven't thought of or that you haven't considered, or open up new ideas for your consideration that have previously not occurred to you. I also encourage you to talk about that with your counselor and to get their feedback in terms of what are some of the options that are available, what are some of the pros and cons, so that you can make the most informed decision that you can. In my group, I use a 12-point relapse prevention plan that everyone has a chance to prepare and present to the group. And the very first question on that 12-point plan, by definition and by intention, is where do you plan to live after MRTC? So much stands or falls on the basis of that simple but extremely consequential decision. I hope you give it its due consideration. Hope this has been helpful, guys. See you next time.